Hello, welcome to the Craft House Magic Set of Tutorials. My name's Ellie and today I'm going to talk to you about how I do patchwork. So the first thing you're obviously going to need to use is a sewing machine and some needles, and I recommend the Smetz brand of sewing machine needle. And for most of the things I do my sewing, I like to use microtex needles, and for general quilting cotton weight fabrics I'd go for a size 12 or 80. To do most things, because if you do go for the universal needles, I find that they're not quite as sharp. These tend to be a bit better. So you'll obviously need a sewing machine. A standard one that does a straight stitch is fine. And then you'll need some equipment for cutting your fabrics. So I'd recommend getting a self-healing cutting mat. The ones that I get tend to be from a shop called Creative Grids online. I'll leave links down below from where I get these. So I've got an A0 size cutting mat, but you can get smaller ones if you want to. Just to start off, I'd recommend getting one of these longer rulers, which is 24.5 inches by 6.5 inches, so that you can cut right across a fat quarter, which is really useful. And then there's a couple of different types of rotary cutters that you can get. These are actually both alpha ones, but this is the old style and this is the newer style. This newer style, the only difference is the colour and the grip is slightly more comfortable. And if you do have a choice and that they're the same price, I would probably go for this blue one, just because it is more comfortable on the hands. So I'd tend to pick these 45mm diameter blades and rotary cutters, just because that's a nice standard size to go for. You can get bigger ones or smaller ones. I do have other size rulers. This one I find quite useful. It's 12.5 inches by 6.5, so it just is a shorter ruler so that you can handle it a little bit better. And I do have some square ones, one of which I like to use is quite a small one, but you don't necessarily need all these rulers. The larger one is the one you really need. So when you're cutting your fabric, it is important to be as accurate as possible. So I'm just going to quickly show you how I'd square up fabric. So these squares are just under 2.5 inches. So in order to get them all the same size, I'm going to cut them to 2.25, so that I get the most out of the fabric that I can, with all the squares being the same. So I've popped my line that's 2.25 inches within the lines of the fabric, so that when I turn it around I can trim it off nicely on the other side, so it is really accurate. I unsheath my blade, then I keep it at right angles with the table, and I carefully cut there and sheath it again, and you can see how that's cut nicely. And then I use my blade to cut across the top, keeping my fingers away, and there we are, we've got two nice edges. If there's any thread, you can just go over it again, just to make sure it's nice clean cut. So there we go. So we then turn the little piece of fabric around, and these two edges are the ones you've just cut. I'd replace the ruler onto the work, and then you can cut at right angles just there. You'll get a nice neater job than me, because you won't be doing it through the viewfinder. So there we go. I'm going to do 9 squares like this and show you how I join them together. So these are the 2.25 inch squares that I've cut nice and accurately, ready to make a 9 patch square. So the first thing I like to do is lay things out on the table, and then I work out which ones I'm going to sew to which. So if you've got patterned fabric, I'd make sure that all your squares have the right fabric facing up, and then I'd put right sides together, and I'm going to put these fabrics in pairs ready to sew. So I'm lining these up nice and neatly, so that I know I'm going to sew down here, here and here to join those together. What you can do is that if you just pop a pin in, just so that you know which side to sew, as you're moving it from your cutting board to your sewing machine, I'll sometimes put a pin in like this, so I know that this is the edge that I need to sew, because once you've got a few together, you might get confused as to where your placement is. So now I'm going to take these over to the sewing machine. So here we are at the sewing machine with our stack of pieces that we need to sew together. So the first thing you need to consider is that if you have got a 1/4 inch foot, you've put that onto your machine ready to use. It just means that between the needle and the edge of the foot is a 1/4 inch, so that you can use this edge of the foot as a guide so that all your seams are 1/4 inch. If you haven't got one of these, you can use a little piece of washi tape or some masking tape just on the base of your machine here, and you can just line up your fabric up to that point. But I'm using a 1/4 inch foot here. So once you've threaded your machine, make sure your thread is underneath your foot and to one side, and that you've got a scrap piece of fabric that you can stitch onto just before the one that you're piecing together, to make sure that you don't get a knot of fabric onto the back of the real work that you're actually going to be using. So I'm going to stick that underneath the foot and stitch to the end of it. So now we're ready to sew these two pieces together, and I put a little pin there just to mark that these are the two edges I need to sew. But I'm going to take these and just make sure that they are very neatly lined up so that they're not, they're completely in alignment on this edge and this edge. I'm hoping that that's okay because I'm doing it through the viewfinder. So I'm going to pop that underneath the machine foot. And I'm going to stitch down the edge, and then once I've got to the end of that one, I'll pick the next one up, and again I'll make sure that these edges are lined up perfectly, and then pop that under the foot, making sure that your two pieces that you've sewn aren't actually overlapped, they're stitched separately. And it's very important to get this 1/4 inch seam allowance as actually accurate as possible. And this is my third one. Just made sure that those pieces of fabric are lined up underneath the foot, and then stitch an accurate 1/4 inch on there as well. So those are the ones that I've actually marked to sew together. I'm going to go back over to the cutting board to show you. So these are the pieces that I've sewn on the machine, and I'm going to just take my scissors and snip those so that they're all separated without snipping the fabric, and snipping the run off just the top. Now these will open up. If I just open them up carefully, I'll just open that one up. So I've opened them all three up, and I can see that I've actually turned this around. This is why we have to lay it out just to check that it's all in alignment. And then I'm going to pair these up. The next row, pair them up as we did before. And I'm going to pop some pins in there just to make sure I know which one is going with which. I'm not worried about lining them up too accurately because I will do that when I'm at the machine. And I'm going to take these to the machine and sew those up. So I've just sewn those together as I did before. I didn't show you because it's exactly the same. And then I'm going to cut these between where I've just run them on. So this is called chain piecing, when you run them all in one row of stitching. So once I've cut those open, I can open them up here just to make sure that I've got all my squares in the right alignment. So I'm going to take the top one, and I'm going to finger press the seams to the outside. Use the heat of my hands to press it into place. The second one, I'm going to press the seams to the inside and just use my fingers to press that into place. And again with the bottom one, push the seams to the outside and finger that into place. And then we can place the top piece onto the next piece down, and you can then see where these are going to fit together. So here, because they're because the seams are going inwards, and then the next piece the seams are going outwards, that fits in nicely. And you can use your fingers to push them together so that these seams fall really closely into place. And then you can either use a standard pin to just pin those where the two seams meet, like so, or you can use these two-pronged pins that look like this, and it just helps you tease the seams into the right direction. So if you're doing lots of these two-prong pins are really helpful. They're from Clover, and I will leave a link below. So I will take these to the machine and I'll show you how I sew them together. So here we are at the machine. I've already stitched into my little run-on piece, and then I'm going to make sure that my fabric is really lined up well on the corner here. I'm just having a quick look to make sure that my pins are all in the right place, and then I'm going to place that carefully under the machine, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch down the side here. So as I'm getting closer to the pin, I don't actually take the pin out until I'm right close to where the needle is, but you don't want to run over your pins if you can help it. So as I'm getting closer to the seam, I make sure that they're tucked into the right place. So this seam's going up and this seam's going down. This is the best position to have your seams. So if your top seam is towards the needle and your bottom seam is away, it encourages the two seams to meet here. It forces them together, if that makes sense. So I will keep stitching until I'm almost hitting the pin. I then take it out, and constantly I'm trying to make sure that my seams are all lined up, and then I carry on until the next pin. So I'm going to ease this out till I'm a bit closer, and then take it out when I'm right at the point where my needle's about to touch. It's difficult for me to do it through the viewfinder, so I don't know if my very edge is as neat as it could be, really. So there we are. Let's have a look. The moment of truth to see whether they're lined up, so that you can then open your seams up and see that that is a perfect match. You might not get this straight away. It might take a little bit of practice, but once you've worked out how to really nestle your seams in nicely, you'll find that you get a perfect result each time. I especially like these two-pronged pins for getting this effect. So I'm now going to go back to the cutting board. I'm going to lay my third piece on here and then stitch it to match this one, and then I'll show you how I get on. So I've just sewn my last seam. I'm going to open that up to check to see if all the corners are perfect. That looks nice and neat. Now I'm going to finger press all the seams at the back to be in the right position. So sometimes people open seams up like this, and you can give that a press. It depends on what you're going to do with your quilt afterwards. You might want to reduce your stitch length so that you get a nice tight stitch here so that it doesn't come apart, but it does depend on how you're going to quilt it as to whether you should open them out or not. So I think for this case I am going to open my seams out here, and then I shall give this a press with the iron. So I finger press this, and I'm just putting the iron on the top just to press it nice and flat. I've done the back first, and then I go to the front, and I don't move the iron around. I'm literally just placing the iron onto the work so that it presses it nice and flat. So there we are, there's the 9 patch that's finished. I hope that's helped you increase your skills on piecing fabric together for quilting. If you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I shall see you in the next tutorial. Bye!